as someone who will be conducting some interviews, obviously you never know quite exactly what's going to walk in the door or what you should be considering. I mean, we talked about a lot of things to do with some real positives for networking, getting involved in a role with other people, communication, so on and so forth. But how about if we flip it on its head? What should I avoid if I'm interviewing people?
Wow, well, that's a good question. In fact, just recently I've been carrying out a little bit of research into that very topic.
Oh?
You know, what are the kind of people you shouldn't employ? We all know the people that we should employ, but what might be some of the danger signals in terms of what you do as an interviewer and maybe what the individual interviewee does that should cause you to think twice about offering somebody a job. So anyway, look, here we go. I'm going to just share with you in a fairly random way what others have told me has been a difficulty for them. So let's start with one of them. So one of the first ladies I spoke to said, oh, well, Jeremy, you should never employ your daughter's boyfriend or your son's girlfriend or a friend of the family, no matter what position they hold, because if those relationships come unstuck, then you're going to be in for a difficult time in terms of managing the person in the employment of the company.
I suppose the lines are blurred between personal and business.
Yeah. And yet it's so easy to do. In point of fact, I have one client who purposefully seems to go out of its way to employ people that it knows through its employees. And I wouldn't say this was a disaster, but I would say it has added to complications. It's certainly something to think about.
Okay.
The next one is an interesting one because somebody else I was talking with said, I'm always very suspicious of the very confident, the overly smooth, maybe the slick individual.
Okay.
No question throws them. They got the answers to everything. They're a good communicator. They come across good body language, good smiling face. They, in a sense, are too good to be true.
It's a bit off-putting, isn't it?
Well, it is, because you wonder how much of that is a cover-up.
Yes.
And in the work situation, is this person ever going to admit to making any mistakes?
Yeah.
And what effect might they have with this rather arrogant attitude on other people that they're working with?
Yeah, I mean, for me, that would personally say something along the lines of, I'm not really open to change.
Indeed.
Or I'm not really open to being moulded, for want of a better word.
Absolutely. Very ego-centered. I call them the apparently effectives. They look the part, they talk the part, and the only problem is they don't actually deliver results, and it's a bit of an impression that they create. Once you take them on board, you find actually they're not effective.
They don't deliver the part.
They don't deliver. So that's one I think that you need to be careful about. As a result of this feedback. Another one, somebody else mentioned to me, well, I'm always concerned about culture and values fit. So I'm always asking myself, is this person likely to fit into the values of the organization? Is this person's values likely to be a fit to the values of the organization? And if I get a feeling that they've come from a background which is the opposite to our corporate values and culture, or if they answer a question in such a way that they give away a value which is clearly not one of our values, then this person's, as far as I'm concerned, that's it.
There'd be too much conflict.
It'd be too much conflict, and it's at a very basic level because it's actually their beliefs that you're dealing with, and it's very unlikely that you're going to change their belief system. So that was another one. So how are we doing so far in terms of people to avoid and the reasons for those?
Well, obviously there are exceptions, of course, but so far I can see where these people were coming from.
Where we're coming from.
Yeah.
So another element I think which people have mentioned to me, and that is, look, you've gone through the number of candidates, not one of them really impresses you. But you think, well, I've got to take one because I can't start this process all over again. Let's settle for second best. I mean, it's not that they're bad. They're not brilliant. I mean, they probably
middle
could
of the
make
road,
out.
yeah.
And the chances are, once they've made that decision, they regret it. And therefore they would say, if you haven't found the best candidate, well, start to look again. Don't settle for that second best.
Maybe you should trust your gut a little more with that
Yeah.
sort of thing. If it doesn't
Yeah.
feel right, then it probably isn't. So,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I suppose, interestingly, others have talked about, well, people that are unprepared, people that are careless, people that haven't done any research into the job, know nothing about the job, are approaching it for all the wrong reasons. Maybe they don't much care whether they get the job or not because they've been forced into attending this interview and it's not really been their idea. There are others that you might regard as the apathetic. They've done no homework, no research, and they will probably then, once they've got the job, if they get the job, be equally apathetic. And apathy is, as you know, it's a real killer, isn't it, in a group of people and morale, because they just don't care. There's probably nothing worse than that.
To be fair, Jeremy, I am actually guilty of doing one job interview where I hadn't done my research, and I didn't get the job. Obviously, I did a little research, but nowhere near enough. And about a year later, having done a good amount of research, then I was offered the job. So I can see it from both perspectives. I totally get it. Yeah.
So I think, that sort of attitude piece. A lack of attention to detail. Others told me, well, look, if they can't even complete the application form correctly and can't even write a covering letter without a whole lot of grammatical errors and mistakes, what's that going to mean?
It's careless. It's
lack
careless.
of attention to detail. So people sort of give that away, maybe. And then interestingly, and I found this one very amusing, and one person said, well, Jeremy, I've learned from experience there are dangers in recruiting the independently wealthy because they're basically, or they can be unmanageable because they don't need you.
Okay.
You say, look, this isn't going very well. I think, we ought to sit down and sort this out. And they say, well, frankly, I'm on my way. I don't like the sound of this. And they don't need you.
That didn't even cross my mind.
They don't know. It never actually crossed my mind. Now, I'm not saying that you should refrain from recruiting dukes and earls. However, if the person clearly doesn't need you and this is a bit of a hobby for them, then they're not going to give their all to it anyway, and you just don't have that interdependence, one relying on the other. So I think that's another... I chuckled at that one, if you like, because it certainly did not occur to me either. No. Now, I don't know if you'd add to any of those that from your experience, even before going into this area of interviewing, would occur to you. Those are just some. I'm sure there are many, many others.
I did conduct an interview a few years ago, and a girl seemed very keen for a job. In this particular role. I was fairly new to doing the interviewing at the time, but she was too keen.
Sort of desperate.
Yes, but there was no pulling back with it. It was just very push, right. And to the point where it felt almost intimidating as an interviewer. So I kind of eventually had to ask her to stop. And then I changed the direction to actually find out a little bit more about her, as opposed to the job and how she would fit into it, essentially.
You see, I would broadly classify that as lacking in emotional intelligence.
Oh, okay.
Talking at you, not being very self-aware, not really taking on board the situation that she was in.
She wasn't really reading it.
Not reading it at all.
No.
And there are some people who are like that, and if they're again like that in an interview, what are they going to be in dealing with your customers or other people? They just don't seem to have any nuanced intuition, if that's the correct way of putting it. And I think those are people who, unfortunately, you stand to put yourself and your organisation at risk if you bring them in.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I would fully endorse that.
No, I completely agree. It was almost a cut off of any kind of connection straight away. And one of the first things I had to think about was the connection that they would have with a paying customer in face to face.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I totally understand, and thank you so much for the heads up.
Well, we haven't covered the obvious things, like the person hasn't got the knowledge, the experience, or the skill for the job.
That's a whole other kettle of
we
fish.
laugh. We laugh at that, but I can tell you the number of occasions where people have said to me, we should never have hired this person, they simply were not right.
Right.
And maybe there was some pressure from someone within the organisation to do this, but right from the outset, the chance of them succeeding was very slim. So that's a basic, but never overlook that one. Well, I think we've cracked it, haven't we?
I think so.